So when you were in narcotics, how many years did you spend in narcotics?
I spent 5 years in narcotics, and I got promoted to sergeant.
So narcotics, we're talking many, many years ago, 80s, 90s. This is probably early 90s at this point in time.
Yeah, it would have been up through probably 93.
Was there a difference in the crime scene, city versus county?
I think that there's really a lot of similarities there. We worked a lot with the Escambia County narcotics, their narcotics unit, and we had we had some areas that we called hot spots at the time, and they had some hot spots, so we were constantly backing each other up. And there's a call for help, Broken Arrow more or less, and we'd all go there and they'd all come here. We'd have Pensacola Village was a little different than it is now. They had a place called Escambia Arms and Truman Arms, and those were a little different than what they are now too. So when they needed help, we would go over there, and we needed help, they would come and help us out. So I would think that the actual day-to-day calls for service were pretty similar, in the city and the county. No one really paid that much attention to our jagged, borders in between the city and the county, and so I would say that the crime, I would say the rates and the crime, the makeup of the crime, the character of the crime is probably the same as was in the Escambia County Sheriff's jurisdiction and the Pensacola Police jurisdiction.
So, you're narcotics. Did you ever go to investigations for homicide?
No, I was in property.
Okay.
I was in property homicide. Property investigator, and then I went straight over to to narcotics. Now, when you have a homicide at the Pensacola Police Department, you're required to assist in everything. So we did assist with homicides, but I was never assigned to investigate a homicide, as the case officer.
Right.
We have others doing that.
And look, I'll just be very fair. This has always been my viewpoint. The resources that the sheriff's office has is very different than the resources that Pensacola Police Department has. Pensacola Police Department does the best they can do with what they have, but the resources the sheriff's office has is huge. There's a much bigger check on that end. So when you're talking about investigating murders, and everybody loves talking about investigating murders, you have to understand that, one, the investigators are seasoned people, and two, they're going to use every resource that they can, because that's a top priority.
Well, and we talk about experiences and living through them and learning from them, and promising to yourself that when you get in a position you can make a change, you're going to do something a little different. When I campaigned to run for sheriff, I called us the sleeping giant. You made a reference to that earlier, because I really believe that we are just at the tip of the iceberg of what we can do. You hit it exactly. There are so many resources that we have now. Again, it's a much bigger yard. The Escambia County Sheriff's Office from Century to Two Beaches and just a lot. And keep in mind, I'm the sheriff in Century, I'm the sheriff at Pensacola Beach, but I'm also the sheriff at Palafox and Garden Street and Palafox and Government Street and where we're sitting now. So there is that jurisdictional pool to do things in the city as well. So we have there's a lot draining on the sheriff's office resources, and we talked about we hired 60 people already this year alone, and fortunately we've only lost 30, which is a plus 30, which is something we haven't had in decades. That type of a positive manpower addition. So there's just a lot that the Escambia County Sheriff's Office requires, and there's a lot more waterways. There's a lot of process service and warrant service and just so much.
I had a crazy case a couple 2 months ago, a month and a half, and this case is a 20-year-old case. It's an old cold case of murder, and one of the things that happened is later on there's an allegation that a particular gun, the murder weapon, was dumped into the river up in, it's really Quintet, but Escambia County is who sent out their dive team. People wouldn't know that Escambia County had a dive team.
Right.
They had the boats and everything out there with more than one person diving, trying to find a gun from 20 years ago. It didn't go so well because 20 years ago. But it's amazing the amount of stuff that you have to have when you are the top constitutional guy in a whole county.
Yeah, and just a case in point, when I was a police chief, we had a boat. We had a boat team, and we had a dive team. And I'm thinking we never got called out. We only had Pensacola Bay. We really didn't get called out. And so I said, well, why don't we give these this equipment in this boat to Escambia County Sheriff's Office because it was a drain on our resources, and I knew that they needed it. And so we did that. We dissolved our dive team, and we gave the boat, donated the boat, more or less the regional asset, to the Escambia County Sheriff's Office, which we have now. So now it come back to haunt me. Now
Right.
I have this boat.
Old Bessie's back to see you.
And so every time someone in Escambia County has a need for for a dive team, then we get the call. We're the closest one, we're the largest one, and we actually enjoy our position as we're the largest agency from here to Jacksonville. I mean, we're larger than Leon County, Tallahassee. We're larger than all the counties in between. So we understand what being a partner means and what being a larger agency means. What it means is we need to help our partners because they would help us if they can. So there's a lot of things that we can do. We have the range, and we allow the Pensacola Police Department, the federal agencies, and the state agencies to use the range that we have. We're building a shoot house onto the range with Escambia County Sheriff's Office funds, so that we can get better at what we do already. So there's just so many things that we're doing. And you talk about resources, and I'm talking also about technology, and I'm talking about real-time crime centers. I'm talking about stepping our game up. And then again, we talked a little bit about hiring and just doing everything we can.
So when you become chief of Pensacola Police Department, that's more of an internal thing than anything else, right? I mean, that's how it works. Yeah. So you had to get appointed by essentially the internal guys at Pensacola Police Department and the city. I mean, there had to be some agreement between the two.
Yeah. Well, what happens is, again, I mentioned you had to have a degree, and it's a very competitive testing process. So I go from patrol officer to sergeant, and I'm a sergeant for 5 years, and then I take the lieutenant's test, and I make lieutenant, and I'm only lieutenant for 2 or 3 years, and I make captain. So when I'm captain, John Mathis is the police chief now, and John Mathis and I served a lot of time on SWAT team together, and we know each other pretty well. So he decides he wanted to make a new position, which is assistant chief of police. So he makes me the assistant chief of police. So for 6 years, I'm the assistant chief of police. And when you're in that position, you go to council meetings. You have a pretty good relationship with the council members. At the time, we're a city council, city manager form of government. So the head of the city is the city manager, but he works for the council. Right. So you have to kind of equally you have to understand your political sphere.
Right. You got to understand the top to the bottom.
You got to know where you're at.
Yeah, exactly.
And so John Mathis is a police chief for like 8 years, and then he decides to retire. And at the time, the city does this change in government. Now they're going to go to a strong mayor form of government. So John Mathis leaves, and I become the interim police chief. Al Kobe at this point is a city manager. Tom Bonfield was just recently replaced, and so yes, you have to be appointed by the city manager, but you also have to have the goodwill of the council as well, or they write his check as well. So now I'm the police chief, and I'm in a unique situation. And to this day, people call me because I am in a bit of a unique situation. I was the police chief under the former form of government and the new form of government. So when Ashton Hayward gets elected, he decides to retain me as a police chief. So I breach both of those forms of government in kind of a unique way, and it worked out very well for me, a learning experience. So I spent 5 years as the police chief.